record on the
so
computer.
works.
I'll record on the computer and then I'll share you the link. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. So let me know that you can see. You see a slide that says the play zone?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. All right. All right. So I'll just share quickly about me. That's really relevant to this, to what you're going to see is I'm currently partnering with Dr. Porges and the Polyvagal Institute, and I'm developing specific applications of their theory. Sorry, two people are trying to enter here. And this specific application that you're going to learn is specific to sports performance or performance on any stage. I am also one of their featured presenters coming up at their annual summit in October. And I'm currently developing a coaching certificate program with them that will certify coaches as being polyvagal informed by Dr. Porges, which is a pretty awesome thing, as you'll learn here. And I'm the developer specifically of this unique application that I call the play zone, which is what we're going to cover. And then we're going to actually bring in the oxygen advantage strategies and principles and talk about them from a polyvagal lens. Okay. So this is the play zone. And more specifically, what it really is it's a neurophysiological approach to optimizing our resilience and our performance. And I like to think that it's really a paradigm shift in sports psychology that's grounded in our physiology. What we're going to explore specifically is we're going to explain the core principles of polyvagal theory and how they apply to performance and resilience. And we're going to describe how the body adaptively responds to stress, what we call stress. And then we'll explore strategies and resources to manage our physiology to our advantage, with a primary focus on breathing and the oxygen advantage strategies in particular. We're going to cover a lot. Okay, it's going to be pretty quick and rapid. So I would suggest not trying to take notes or anything, just sort of sit back, and there's a lot of images I'm going to use because I really want you to feel what some of these athletes are experiencing. So just take it in and know that we'll talk more about it at the end. This will also be recorded. And I do have a more in-depth course that you're always welcome to take. Okay, so just kind of get a flavor for it all instead of trying to really grasp everything. I'm going to stop here for a second because there's 3 people in the waiting room, but I'm not sure where to go to see that, Patrick. So hang on one sec.
I think what you have to do is
I got it.
slide. Yeah.
I got it. Admit. I got to go out of that slide. That's right. Okay, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. And there's. Okay. So I'll have to do that from time to time, and I apologize. I think I know how to do it now. Okay. So more practically speaking, these are the 3 questions we're really going to look at. Why do we tighten up when the stakes are high? Why do we struggle to sustain our level of performance? And why do our mechanics and skills seem to work really well in practice, but they fall apart on game day? And we're going to look at 3 stories. These are true stories, and these are visual stories that occurred recently on a professional tennis court. Although throughout this, we're going to look at tennis, I want you to think more broadly. What we're going to learn applies to all sports. It applies to all types of performances, okay? I like to look at tennis particularly because on the court, we feel like we're alone, because we are. And in life, we feel alone at times. And often we might have fans and support teams and family supporting us, but at the same time, we have others rooting against us. We have others who don't have our best interests at heart, which is an opponent. Tennis also is a microscope. It really allows us to take a really close look at what it's like to be human, to notice the behaviors and the feelings that we can see athletes experiencing. And what I hope you learn from me today is what's really beneath those behaviors. what's beneath those emotions and those reactions that we're seeing, okay? And that we all share this same DNA, the same nervous system. The first story we're going to look at is Sasha's Vera, and he was the world number 3 at this time. This was the Australian Open of this year in 2022. He was the heavily favorite in this match. This was the 4th round. And we're going to just go through these images. I'm going to point out a couple of key features in his presentation, in his body, and then we'll wrap it all up and you'll understand it later on about why I'm pointing out these particular things. So here he is at the beginning of the match. He's smiling, he's reaching out, shaking the ball kid's hands. He has a relatively good posture, and in my language, he feels very safe and comfortable in this moment. However, 2 points into the match, if you look at his face here, he's no longer calm, he's not relaxed. He's already perspiring a ton, and he has a lot of muscle tension. In this moment, he's really exerting a lot of energy. He's playing the game, but he's exerting a lot of energy. And if we could see his heart rate, we'd see it was very high. And if we could see his heart rate variability, particularly the respiratory component of it, we'd see it suppressing quite significantly. Here he is 2 points after that. And now there's no muscle tension. Look at his facial expression. Look at his eyes, they're actually closed. And look at his head position, okay? This is later in the first set, and he's actually crouching, and he's looking up at his support team, okay? Again, very little muscle tension, not a lot of expression. Minutes later, after that picture, the set was over. He lost. It was a really quick set. Here he is sitting between the first and the second set. Again, look at his facial expression. Look at his eyes. And you can kind of see his left hand, but his hands are like this. And he's looking up and he's just like, what's happening? Okay. Very next game. So now it's the start of the second set. He's trying to pump himself up. So this is after he wins a point. He's pumping up his biceps and he's actually yelling verbally, come on, come on. If we could see his heart rate now, we'd see it again spiking, and we'd see this heart rate variability suppressing. We'd see his breathing is elevating also, okay? But as quickly as that happened, and I apologize for the blurriness here, I was snapping these are all me watching the screen, and I'm seeing things in the camera off in the distance. So this is a shot I just saw way off in the distance, and so I zoomed in, that's why it's blurry. But look at his posture here, and if you can see his left hand, notice his left hand position, notice his shoulders, notice his head, okay? So as quickly as he was amped up, now he's not, right? 2 points after that, he's literally erupting, smashing his racket. He's exploding out of control, okay? 3 points after that, smashing, he's right back here, okay? He's back into this, okay? What's happening? Lack of muscle tension to go. Heart rate now is slowing, actually. Next point after that shot, he's looking over at his team box. He's got this posture going. He's got a little bit of muscle tension, but he's not erupting, a little bit of muscle tension. Heart rate's coming back up a little. Couple of points after that, here he is again. He's got some muscle tension, but he's just in disbelief, completely discouraged, shrugging, looking at his team box. Here he is. And I posed the question, ahead or behind here? He actually just broke his opponent. He's back even at 5-all in the second set. But does he look like he is? What do you read? What do you feel when you look at him right here? Notice his mouth is open. Notice where his head, sloping of his shoulders, okay? Couple of games later, okay, this is that 5-all piece. Again, this was a picture again of him walking away. Look at the posture. Is this a guy who is even? The commentators are saying he's right back in this. Zverev's got this. He's got a chance. It's a best of 5. But look at his posture. Look at his left arm. And this was a couple points after that. This was actually in the tiebreak. So that set went into a 6-all, and then they went into a tiebreak. So this is later. And again, it's blurry. But here he is. He amps up. He just lost a point. And it's now like 6-5 in the tiebreak. He's down a break, mini break. And he's getting ready to smash his racket, and he stops himself. This is fascinating because what we'll get to later is I'm arguing he should have let himself smash the racket. And you'll understand why later. But he didn't. He stopped himself. He ends up losing the next point, and here he is sitting on the changeover between the second and third set. Look at his eyes, look at his facial expression. This was him looking at his coaches. He's got 4 of them. Okay, so remember, I'm going to admit somebody here. Apologize for the break. Okay. So he's looking at his coaching box, end of the second set. But remember, it's still best of 5 sets or best of 5. He still has plenty of time. He's done this before. But here's what he sees. These are his 4 coaches. One of them is actually his father. He's looking over at them, and this is how they are. What kind of cues do you think he's feeling? Is he being reassured? What are they feeling? Do they feel confident? Right? You can just look, and we'll talk about their postures later on, but just notice where they are in this whole world. This is the end of the whole match. Literally that third set, it was like 6-2, but it was over before it started. It was like 30 minutes done. Here he is walking off. Again, notice where he's looking. Notice his posture. Okay, defeated. He's depleted. He had nothing left. Okay, so why did this happen? What we've been told, what we all believe, is that his quality of play, his behaviors, his reactions, they're a reflection of his intentions, or they're a reflection of mental weakness. He needs to get tougher mentally, or he doesn't have a lack of desire, or maybe even a flaw in his character, or a poor game plan, or he doesn't have the right support team, right? Whatever it is, we hear all these things. And what I'm saying is that actually what he's experiencing, it's a shared human reaction. This is an autonomic nervous system response that we all share. And it's actually an adaptive pattern that follows a very predictable sequence, which we're going to look at. I need to admit one other person here. Okay. And what we're going to see is we're going to see the same bodily movements, the same facial expressions, the same postures and gestures, the same emotions and behaviors. We see that no matter the athlete, the performer, whatever the field of play is, or whatever the stage, it's all the same. And here's why we're going to get to. But this is Naomi Osaka on the left, and this is Novak Djokovic on the right. Naomi Osaka, at this point, this was the US Open, this past US Open, she was number 5 in the world, and this was in the 3rd round. This was Djokovic, who's still number 1 in the world. This was last year in the Tokyo Olympics. And as those pictures that we just showed you, these are all taken in sequence, okay? And I want you to notice the similarities between the 2 of them and what we just looked at. Here they are at the beginning of their matches. Like Zverev, if you look at their faces, they're focused, but their eyes aren't overly constricted or overly wide. They're relaxed and focused. They're actually both nasal breathing, which is awesome. They're balanced. They have muscle tension, but it's not extreme. If we looked at their heart rate, we'd see that it's elevated, but we still see some respiratory sinus arrhythmia in there. We'd see that they're in control. I'm going to admit somebody. Okay. Now, this is later on, both of them in the first set. Now they're no longer in that safe place. They're both agitated and angry. And look at the muscle tension in the face. And you can really see it in Djokovic. Look at around his neck, his jaw. Eyes are super intense, okay? And now if we saw their heart rate and their breathing is more elevated, shallower, mostly through their mouth, and we'd see a heart rate that's elevated, and we'd see less and less of that heart rate variability, okay? And here we see not too long after that shot, this was pretty quick for both of them. This I call the angry crouch. We saw Zverev in a crouch, but he didn't even have any energy going. He was actually in a defeated crouch. These 2 are in this angry crouch. And what's really interesting about this is that up top, they're really in this fight zone. They're in this fight mode, but their body is actually beginning to protect itself. They're coming into this protection, covering up this ventral side. Mouths are wide open, tons of tension in the face. They're both verbally yelling, but also what's interesting is they're not directing any of that mobilized energy toward executing. They're not doing anything toward attacking or doing something toward their game plan. It's all internalized. This is a key point. Here they are not long after those angry crouches. And now what do you see in their faces? These are faces that are fear, panic. Now look at the eyes, wide open. Djokovic, mouth wide open, panting. They are not playing to win. They're playing not to lose at this point. They're hoping their opponents make a mistake because they are not in any control. Okay. Again, their breathing and their heart rate are super elevated. They have no respiratory sinus rhythmia anymore. They're at their threshold. This is really important because not long after this, they're so close to their threshold. Not long after this is this picture. Back to what we saw with Vera. Okay. Muscle tension completely gone. Heads tilted to the side, looking away. Osaka's eyes are closed. Now, if we had a heart rate monitor on, we'd see their heart rate all of a sudden is slower. They didn't get the respiratory component back of heart rate variability, but their heart rates have lowered and their breathing is actually slower. And this is just a few minutes after those last pictures. Now they're looking for a place to hide. He's hiding behind his hand. She's hiding behind her visor, and their heart rate continues to slow and their breathing continues to slow. Muscle tension is dropping. Metabolic output is slowing and decreasing. And here they are, done. Naomi still had another whole set to play. She was 1-all. This was one set apiece, and she is done. He finished. That was it for him. He's done too. He's over. He actually collapsed at the net before he did this. They couldn't sustain any more metabolic activity. Their heart rates now and their breathing are very slow. It's almost like turtles going into their shell. They're hunkering down and protecting. Okay. What is really going on? Okay. Again, despite what we have heard and what we think is happening, and that these are intentional choices, they're not. These are not conscious, planned, thinking brain decisions. These are bodily adaptations, reflexive reactions that we all have, that our autonomic nervous system is triggering beneath conscious awareness. And this is always happening. It's always happening whether or not we realize it or not. It's happening in this moment for all of us. We're in some reaction to the environment. Okay. So to gain a little bit deeper understanding, I'm going to cover the 3 primary principles of polyvagal theory, which will kind of tie all of this together. Okay. The first is what's called neuroception. And that is how our autonomic nervous system is always unconsciously scanning what's going on around us and within our own bodies all the time. The second is what is called the hierarchy of bodily states. And it's this shared pattern that I keep referring to, the shared pattern of bodily reactions that we have to stress, or what we call stress, and challenges. And then the third is what is called the social engagement system. And it's this unique mammalian capacity that links our social interactions, how we engage with one another, directly with the vagal regulation of our heart and our breathing, and ultimately our entire physiology. So the autonomic nervous system, real simplistically, it has 2 primary functions. The first is to regulate our internal organs, to maintain homeostasis, make sure our digestion and elimination, our inflammation, immune systems, all of that is functioning without us having to have conscious control of it, okay? To coordinate our health and our growth and our resilience. But its second function, which polyvagal theory is emphasizing, is that ongoing scanning, that always beneath conscious awareness scanning of what's going on in the environment around you, within your own body, and in your relationships, in your interactions. And then it reflexively shifts our physiology, our bodily state, our breathing, our heart rate, our level of muscle tension, and it diverts resources away from homeostasis, away from that internal environment, and puts them toward whatever we need to overcome, okay? And that is the process that Stephen Porges termed neuroception. So that's what neuroception is. A little more in depth of that, because it's a key component, is that beneath awareness, it's always scanning for what's safe and what's unsafe. And it's doing that in the environment around us. So right here, right now for you, it's doing that in the environment around you. It's picking up sounds, it's picking up smells, temperature of the air, and it's doing that inside your body So it's getting feedback whether you're hungry, you have to go to the bathroom. Do you have systemic inflammation? Do you have pain? Do you have fatigue? Okay. And it's also doing that between us. So it's reading my voice, my postures, my gestures, and it's determining whether or not I'm sending you cues that are safe and predictable or unsafe. Okay. It's doing that all of the time. And then depending on what cues of safety or risk are present, it automatically shifts our physiology, what we call our bodily state, depending on whether, again, subconsciously, the nervous system says it's safe, or it's dangerous, or it's overwhelming, or even life-threatening. Okay. And that is going to change our heart rate, our breathing, our blood pressure, our body temperature, our muscle tension, our digestion, our energy level, our sense. And then this is really important. And you see it in athletes. It's also going to change our sensitivities to light, to background sound, and to other movements, right? When you see an athlete, all of a sudden, especially on the tennis court, all of a sudden they get distracted by an airplane flying over. That's a cue that their physiology is feeling under threat, because now they're retuned and they're hearing lower frequency background sounds. It's really important. And these bodily reactions, they occur reflexively and unconsciously, and they are adaptive. They're adaptive responses to, quote, survive the current situation, the current environment, the current interaction. It's not perception. Neuroception occurs beneath awareness, and it occurs long before we have time to perceive or interpret the risk in the environment, or even to form an explanation or make a plan of action. It occurs long before that. Think of a startle response, okay? You hear a loud noise and you jump, and then you realize, well, that's happening all the time, okay? And it doesn't always have to be a danger response. It could also be a cue of safety, which is important. And we'll talk more about that. So this brings us to that second principle, which is this hierarchy of bodily states. And here's an image of it to help sort of put it in your understanding. At the top is this safe and calm, relaxed, accessible physiology, where we saw Vera when he was shaking hands with the little ball kid, okay? He was basically in that top, safe, calm, relaxed state. At the first signs of danger, you'll see on the side, I have safe, danger, overwhelm. When we first sense danger, again, through that neuroception, we first mobilize. And we typically mobilize in fight, meaning we attack and get aggressive. And then second to that, we mobilize in flight, where we avoid and get anxious. Sometimes they're blended, it's very close, but from this athletic perspective, when we see someone in fight, that's typically the first response, okay, versus flight, anxious. But then no matter what, no matter how you're mobilized, if you don't overcome the challenge, or if the challenge is too big and your nervous system feels overwhelmed, no escape, no way out, it will immobilize. It'll begin to slow the heart rate, just hunker down and conserve whatever's left, okay, as a last ditch effort to survive. So just like Zverev here, when we feel safe and calm and confident in our physiology, as determined by our neuroception, we can be in our safe zone. We can actually be accessible. We can extend a hand. We have decent posture. Our movements would be fluid, easy, okay? We can be accessible. Whereas when we sense danger, we will first mobilize resources, and we're going to mobilize to fight or to flee. Here he is in fight mode, and we get aggressive and attack, and we might be overreactive and explosive. This is what I call the fight zone, okay? Or we might get anxious, we might get afraid and unsettled, we might get stressed out, really not certain what to do, which is what we see here with him. We're looking for a path of escape, but we're confused. We don't know what to do. And that I'm calling the flight zone, okay? As our first line of defense, we mobilize resources first. That's nature's way of protecting us. When we detect danger, our body amps up to prepare and fight and attack or to run away, defend or escape, okay? If we mobilize in a fight or flight response, either way, as long as we're mobilized, going back to what the autonomic nervous system does, we are temporarily interrupting homeostasis. So we're diverting resources away from health and growth. And think of it from an athlete, we're diverting resources away from recovery in that moment, and we're putting our resources toward expending our available metabolic resources to mobilize, right? So we see heart rate increase. We see that respiratory component of heart rate variability decrease. We see our breathing get more shallow. We see it pick up. We often see people open their mouth, start mouth breathing. It also will shut off our digestion. We're going to activate our sympathetic nervous system. We're going to activate the HPA axis. We're going to start flooding the system with all kinds of byproducts of sympathetic activation. And we're also going to limit our thinking. We actually can't think and be as creative and see all the solutions that are in front of us. When we're in fight, we actually zero in. We just get targeted in. When we're in flight, I'm going to admit somebody here. When we're in flight, we actually get confused and we can't focus. Okay. But regardless, when we're mobilized in a defensive threat physiology, we can't access most of our prefrontal cortex. We just can't. It also, really importantly, it biases everything we experience. We see more of what's threatening. We feel more of what's negative. Okay. We struggle to see and to feel who or what is actually safe and predictable. And just like Vera and Djokovic and Naomi, when we are unable to overcome the challenge, when we're overwhelmed by the threat, or when we've depleted all of our available resources, we will begin to immobilize. We will begin to withdraw. We will check out. We might even quit. We might even physically collapse or shut down. We might even pass out. And these are not conscious choices or planned decisions. It's really important to know. Our body is literally reflexively and adaptively shifting, okay? In this immobilized state, we're actually, our heart rate is slowing, our breathing is slowing. All of our muscle tension is actually getting less. We don't function like normal, okay? But this is nature's most ancient survival response. And it literally is to conserve what we have left. It's to play dead, okay? And deceive our predator into thinking we're not alive. But what we experience on the court, on any stage, or even in any day-to-day experience, is we would feel discouraged, we'd feel helpless, we might feel hopeless, or even disconnected, right? We could lose interest, or we might feel numb, okay? But at all times, including right now, we either, and this is on the court or off the court, we're either feeling basically in our physiology as determined by our neuroception, we're feeling safe and comfortable and in control, this picture on the left, or we're feeling mobilized in some sort of defense, either attacking or feeling anxious, or we're overwhelmed and we're depleted, looking for a place to hide, to conserve resources, or giving up, collapsing, the picture on the far right. And these feelings arise in our body, okay, as adaptive reactions. So this is a key concept and another visual. I just want to make sure you really grasp that these shifts are always occurring. And from the standpoint,
sorry, Michael,
okay.
I sent a message there to Exima just to mute. Would you mind just muting everybody yourself there? You've full control over it.
Okay. So where do I do that?
You might have to come out of the presentation. And just, you should say mute everybody.
No aparecía, como aparecía not vaccinated, y yo, ay carajo, ¿será que no subió?
Mute all, here we go.
Listo, gracias.
There we go.
Listo.
That do it? There we go. All right, I'm learning something. Thanks, Patrick. So back to this sort of pyramid. These shifts that are occurring, they impact every aspect of our life, how we're experiencing the world and how we're experiencing what we're doing on the court in our performance, what's going on, and it shapes everything, okay? I'm saying that it is underlying our performance. All right, so in reality though, and this is the sequence of Naomi here. And in reality, these three primary bodily states, this safe, this mobilized threat, and this immobilized, they're really a continuum, and it's a spectrum of blended states. So I call them zones. It's not always looking exactly the same for everyone, but they're zones, okay? And some of us, we can get really locked into being amped up and kind of in that agitated, angry, aggressive, confrontational zone. Some of us, we get really anxious and unsettled, and that's where we mobilize and we get really stressed out and we have a hard time calming down. Some of us really move quickly into that withdrawn, disconnected, hopeless, right? Or some of us really toggle back and forth, which is what we saw with Vera. He was really mobilized and then immobilized, mobilized and immobilized, okay? So we will shift through this sequence in different ways, okay? And that's really important. But we all share the same sequence. We all mobilize first, and then when that doesn't work, we will immobilize, and it's not a conscious choice. And then the second key point is that there's an ideal state. There's an ideal state for optimal performance and resilience. It's a hybrid. I'm going to admit somebody, okay? It's a hybrid state of that mobilization with safety, comfort, and control. And it's positioned at the top of this diagram, okay? That's Naomi at the top of this diagram. And it's what I call the play zone, okay? Which is the title of this whole presentation and what I've developed. That is the play zone, okay? And it's this blended state of safety and mobilization. And this is another visual of it. And as we've kind of talked about, we're moving all the time between safety, mobilized, shutdown in different variations. But when we really want to call up a state of high performance, we want to figure out how to bring ourselves into what I'm calling the play zone, this blended state. Roger Federer, if you know Roger Federer, his beauty, his fluidity, his grace, it's emerging out of this state, this relaxed, calm, but highly mobilized, okay? And through what I'm teaching you here, you can learn to access this on demand. That's the point, okay? Versus getting overwhelmed by the big moments or destructive self-talk and staying in your head or overly emotional and erupting, okay? You can learn to get ahead of those things and regain control before you're shutting down and quitting, okay? Which brings me to what I call the performance hierarchy, okay? Those hierarchy of bodily states, that pyramid that we've already looked at, that is defined by Dr. Porges's polyvagal theory. I didn't make that up. That's his theory based on our nervous system. What I'm saying is that maps directly onto a performance hierarchy. And it looks just like the other pyramid, except the play zone is at the top. Okay, it's that safe and free, but fully engaged and mobilized, but just with the right amount of mobilization. And that every single aspect of performance, whether it's our power, whether it's our endurance, whether it's our mechanics and our technique, whether it's our execution, even our reaction time and our ability to focus and concentrate, and our creativity, our problem solving, and even most importantly, that felt sense of belief and confidence in what you can do, those are all grounded on our physiology, our bodily state, okay? We've already talked a little bit about this. You can move through this sequence. You can move up and down, left and right, and you can do it with or without any awareness of it, which is what most of us do. It just happens. and we can do it reflexively and reactively, or we can learn to recognize this and do this, navigate this sequence with intention, with awareness, right? And that's what I'm getting at here, okay? So what's also really important is that we can't jump up to the top. So if we're on the bottom row and we're in this phase of immobilizing, we have to mobilize before we can get to the play zone, okay? And we saw that in Zverev, which is why I wanted to point out some of those things. We saw that he intuitively knew he needed to get himself going. And so he first started with pumping himself up. And that's why I was also saying that picture where he was going to smash the racket and he stopped himself. He may have benefited by letting himself smash the racket, get some more mobilized energy going, and get back up neurophysiologically to a higher zone. Okay, that's why I wanted to point that out. And that picture was blurry, but I knew it was a really important point to the match. And I had to zoom in on the camera to get that. So that, because that is a really big point. And so sometimes we see an athlete smash a racket and we're like, or whatever it is. But if they know what they're doing it for, it can change everything. And if they know how to harness what they just did to climb up into play, to find enough safety and control with that energy, that's a whole different experience and a whole different outcome than just smashing a racket and going back into that angry crouch. That's going back down, okay? I think you can follow me on this, right? So that's an important part. We can't skip a zone. When we're immobilizing, we need to get some energy going. Doesn't mean we have to smash a racket. Doesn't mean we have to get angry. Just means we have to get our heart rate elevated, our breathing elevated, because when we're in that lower zone, we're actually slowing our heart rate. We're slowing our breathing. We're slowing our metabolic output, okay? It's also really important to realize that, as we just witnessed, these are the champions of the sport. These are the best players in the world. And even they fall down the sequence all the way to collapse. We can't, no matter how good we get at this, we can't stop every reaction from occurring, okay? The reactions will occur reflexively, but we can change how we relate to that reaction, to what's happening, and we can change what we do before it goes all the way into the shutting down, okay? That's what I want you to understand, is that these bodily reactions are wired into our physiology, wired into our DNA, and we can learn to recognize them and then regain control of them, okay? So when we start noticing we're in that flight zone, we can do deliberate things to move into fight and then add more safety and get into play. When we're immobilized, we can do deliberate strategies, some of which will involve breathing, which we'll talk about, to get some mobility going, to get into the fight or flight zone and then get into play, okay? So we learn to climb what I call this performance hierarchy. We learn to navigate it and climb with intention, with skill, on demand. And this is what I'm suggesting is behind what we're seeing as their top performers and our champions. What we call mental strength or being a clutch performer, it's really rooted in their physiology, and they've become masters of their physiology. Being able to keep the body relaxed and flexible, yet highly energized and focused, okay? They can enter what I call the play zone when their opponents crack, when their opponents break to the pressure. They actually feed on it because they actually have learned to master their physiology, whether they realize it or not. That's what they're doing. While the rest of us, even Djokovic here, this is another picture of Djokovic from the US Open, not long after that last sequence. And he completely imploded here too, and he collapsed. Most of us, when the stakes are highest, we will tighten up, right? We're going back to our original questions. Or we might feel great one day and then come back out the next and wonder what's going on. Why don't we feel what we had before? And then why our mechanics break down? We have it in practice, but they don't sustain it when it really counts. And from a neural perspective, from a polyvagal perspective, this is because from the autonomic nervous system's point of view, beneath conscious awareness, the stage, the court, being in front of everyone, having to perform, it's unsafe, especially when you throw status and identity or even economics and money on the line, okay? The environment is throwing cues of risk, uncertainty, evaluation. We're paying an opponent who doesn't have our best interests at heart. Our body is being pushed, so we're having fatigue. We might even have injury. Those are all cues of risk and unsafety and danger to the nervous system. So the stage naturally is an unsafe environment. And it's a natural human reflex to mobilize into that fight or flight zone, even before we take the stage, in anticipation. And it's also a natural reflex that when we're overwhelmed by the situation, that we shut down in one shape or another. We dissociate or we collapse. It's natural. We see it on every field of play. We see it in the Olympics. We saw it with Simone Biles, right? We see it in any sport. We see an athlete like Ash Barty, who's 25, wins the Australian Open, #1 in the world, and she retires. Okay, that's a body that has been pushed too hard for too long, that can't sustain it. And she was smart enough to realize that she couldn't stay, quote, alive to continue in that path. And she pulled out. She's smart, but most people are not doing that. And then we're seeing behaviors off the court because they're so dysregulated in their physiology. Okay, enough of my speech, sorry. So, but this is also why, and this is the key point here, this is why our performance on game day, when the stakes are highest, when it really matters the most to us, why it doesn't match our true potential, our highest potential. That's why. Which brings us all the way back to those 3 questions, right? The why do we tighten up? Why do we struggle to perform consistently? And why do we break down when it really counts? And it's because when our performance doesn't match our potential, we are in a defensive or a protective, a reactive, suboptimal physiological state. That's different from when we practice, or that's different from when we're at our best. That's all that it is. And what I call our play zone, we are simply not in our play zone when we're not at our best. It's not that we're not as good as we think we are. It's literally that we aren't in the same zone that enables us to be as good as we think we are. That's it, right? In that pressure-filled moment, when we look at all those images, what we're seeing is that they do not have the same heart rate. They don't have the same breathing. They don't have the same metabolism or the same muscle tension, the same speed of execution, the same posture. They don't have the same physiology when they're under more threat of the conditions of the stage that they're on. That's all that it is. And so instead of putting more effort into developing skill or developing whatever piece of the game that you're trying to develop, the foundation is to learn how to manage your physiology so that when you take the stage, no matter what's coming at you, you know how to manage and come back into that play zone, come back into that safe, blended state with mobilization. Or you learn how to perform in those other physiological states that aren't optimal. So those are the 2 choices. And I suggest both, right? Learn how to perform when you're highly mobilized and out of control, but know that it's not going to be your optimal performance. But then ultimately learn how to bring yourself into that same physiology, no matter what is coming at you, okay? Which brings us to this. So when we understand that, what I'm suggesting, then we change how we practice and how we train, off the court and on the court. And it actually becomes what I'm calling a neural practice, which is the practice of being able to track with awareness where we are physiologically, and then being able to manage it and ultimately being able to master it on demand, right? So that we can ramp up, we can calm down, or we can stabilize with control. Which technically, so we're going to get a little technical here. Technically, what we're doing is we're enhancing what is called our baseline cardiac vagal tone, which is that I've said it a number of times. It's that respiratory component of heart rate variability. It's technically called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And very much of the oxygen advantage strategies are improving that. That's what's vital. So a lot of the stuff that Patrick has brilliantly brought to all of us is doing that. Okay, it's fantastic. The second point is that we want to improve what's called vagal efficiency. Vagal efficiency is how rapidly we can release what's called our vagal brake. It's actually the ventral fibers coming on the vagus that go to the pacemaker of the heart. And it's how efficiently we can release that and allow our heart rate to speed up. And then how effectively we re-engage it and bring ourselves back to calm. Okay, so this is what ideally we want. We want to not have to turn on sympathetic activation fully in order to jog across the street or in order to engage in this conversation that we're engaging. Ideally, I want to be just releasing this vagal brake, allowing my heart rate to speed up enough, but not go into sympathetic. Okay, that's what vagal efficiency is, and it's really important. And breathing practices where we're doing some of the high altitude training stuff with or breath holds, those are doing that in a way. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then third, the point of all the practice is to learn how to navigate those different zones, those different, even the threat physiology, to learn to navigate that with control, right? And know how to move back into another zone. So I'm going to let somebody else in. So those are my points of the play zone practices. And the way to help conceptualize all of this is I like to create this as a visual of what I call a container of safety and control. And when we take the stage, these are the different things that I would teach an athlete to have in their bag of tricks and build their container of safety. And as you can see, there's rituals and routines, there's mental imagery, postures, gestures, there's certain body movements, there's awareness and attentional control, there's muscle tension and relaxation, there's paying attention to specific sensory information, and there's eye gaze, facial expressions, and then we have controlled breathing, which is what we're going to focus on, and also this, what I have called here, the social engagement and support. And we'll learn quickly about why those are really, really important. So before we get into the breathing, we'll talk about social engagement and support because it's also a core principle of polyvagal theory. Facial expressions that are coming from others that are warm and welcoming, especially around the eyes, our body interprets as a giant cue of safety, okay? Listening to a pleasant voice. So if someone has a lot of prosody and modulations in our voice, our nervous system interprets that as a warm and welcome cue of safety. Seeing postures and movements that are predictable, that align with your expectation, those are also cues of safety, right? Whereas someone who's not moving their head, if they were just talking with not moving, that's a cue of risk, danger, it's unpredictable. Okay, so as an athlete out there on their field of play or as a performer on stage, the cues coming at us from others, particularly our coaches and our teammates and our friends, they can be really positive. They can be huge impacts on our performance because they can help shift our physiology. They can give us enough safety and comfort that we can take our mobilized energy and turn it into play. Okay. This is a pretty important concept. So we're just going to do a couple slides on it. So this is technically called the social engagement system, which is really this connection between our heart and our face. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that we actually have the ventral vagal connection to our heart is actually interconnected in the brainstem to the nerves that control the striated muscles of the face and head, including some of the neck. And these are more specific what they are. So the muscles of the larynx and the pharynx, which determine the rhythm and the intonation and the melodic component of our voice. They tie directly to the vagal regulation of our heart. So that means that we broadcast to others, whether we are safe and accessible, okay, with those melodic intonations, or if we're locked in a really high pitch, or we have a low, flat monotone voice, those are actually signals of risk and danger and warning. Excuse me, I'm going to let someone else in. The muscles around the eyes, the orbicularis oculi, which is why I kept having you look at their eyes in those pictures, those also will either portray warmth and welcome, or they're going to portray warning. I'm not in a good place. Danger, stay away. Okay. The muscles of the middle ear too, and that's why they determine our sensitivity to low frequency background noise and how well we absorb the frequencies in the human voice. And as we're in that state of threat physiology, we actually downregulate the tension in those middle ear muscles subconsciously so that we can hear threat cues more readily. What are threat cues? Low background frequency sounds, right? And so we become more sensitive to the airplane flying overhead or the baby crying in the stands, okay? That is a natural defense reaction, okay? And then the muscles in the neck, the traps and the sternocleidomastoid. So they control our gestures and our movements, the tilt, the turning, the nodding of our head. And that's why I was pointing all that stuff out. So these cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, and then the vagus is 10 and 11. Those nerves all collect in the brainstem and they're all interconnected. And so we literally wear our heart on our face. And so here, this is a picture of Naomi Osaka, and this is her coach. She's been through a lot of coaches, but this is one of her coaches talking to her. And if you look at her here, her body language is telling me she doesn't feel safe. Okay, it doesn't matter what he's saying. It could be the tone of his voice. It could be his facial expression. It could be his posture. It could just be everything else in the environment. But right here, right now, she is not receiving cues of safety. Okay, her leg is up. That's her protecting her ventral side. She's wrapping her arm around it. She is not receiving cues of safety. So whatever is going on here is not lifting her. Okay, so we as coaches, we are impacting at every moment, for better or for worse, our player, whoever we're coaching, we're impacting them through our intonation of our voice, our facial expressions, our gestures, our postures, our movements at every moment, whether or not we realize it or not. He didn't realize it, but she clearly was not, it wasn't helping her in this moment. Hang on, there's a couple more people waiting to get in. Sorry. Okay. At birth, so the social engagement system, at birth, and this is pretty important too, this is what coordinates our ability to suck, to swallow, and to breathe, and to vocalize, okay? It's how we attune to our caregiver to signal what we need. I need some warmth or I need some food, okay? It's controlled through this social engagement system. As we mature, this develops into our capacity to communicate, to cooperate, to connect with others through our tone of voice, through our expressions, all the stuff we talked about. But on court, it's something that we don't think about, but it is vital. This link between the heart and the face, it's vital for performance. It's vital for helping us climb out of that immobilized state or mobilized state and contain it with enough safety to perform. That's why a support team is so, so vital. But they have to understand what they're doing, what role they're playing, okay? And this is another picture. This is another coach of hers. This is actually great too. And I just wanted to emphasize that we've all witnessed, right, how the tone of voice, the expressions, the language of a teammate or a coach, and we may have even felt it, say, if you've played a sport with another teammate, we know how it impacts our performance, but there's actually a neurophysiology, a neuroanatomical reason, okay? And that's what polyvagal theory is really telling us, how important that is. And this is another picture of her coach currently, and he's not sending giant cues of safety either. So anyway, and now this is the kind of cues we need. So this is actually Djokovic. Sorry, there's a few more people coming in. This is Djokovic coming over to his wife and daughter actually right after the match. But what was really cool about this, and whether or not you're a Djokovic fan, and there's a lot of controversy, and that's not why I'm using him in this display. He in this match, which was really awesome, partway through the second set, he actually, and I've not seen it done before, he looked over at his little girl and he gave her like a wave, mid-match. And that from a neurophysiological standpoint is gigantic. What a huge cue of safety. And that's something he wouldn't have done before. That's something new for him. So anyway, I just wanted to show it, but now we'll move into breathing. Okay. And this is my polyvagal perspective on breathing. And then we'll get into the specifics of oxygen advantage stuff. Okay. So breathing is really a neural exercise for the autonomic nervous system. In other words, we can deliberately challenge our autonomic nervous system through different breathing patterns, through changing the rate and the ratio of our in-breath and out-breath, through doing breath holds, through nasal breathing, particularly during exercise. Those can literally become neural exercises, okay? That can actually help build a resilient nervous system. Breathing also, really importantly, it's a reflection of our current physiological state, and it's a portal into shifting our state on demand, okay? Because breathing is regulated automatically by our nervous system, we can simply just check in with how we're currently breathing to gauge what state we're in or what zone we're in, okay? And at the same time, it's one of the most powerful and quick, effective ways to regain control of our physiology, okay? Third, breathing directly influences the vagal impacts on our heart, okay? So real simplistically, when we breathe in, our heart rate will speed up. We're actually dampening the cardioinhibitory impacts of the ventral vagal pathways on the sinoatrial node of the heart, okay? We're also actually allowing some sympathetic activation to come online. So whenever we breathe in, we're allowing the heart rate to speed up. We're allowing the sympathetics to come a little bit online. We're essentially releasing what we refer to metaphorically as the vagal brake. Whereas when we breathe out, we're actually re-engaging the vagal brake. We're slowing the heart rate down and we're dampening sympathetics. Okay, so we're enhancing the cardioinhibitory impacts of the ventral vagal pathways on the heart's pacemaker when we breathe out. Key principle. Breathing low, the next principle, breathing low, engaging the diaphragm, increases ventral vagal tone. So, which is that respiratory component, that RSA that I keep referring to. So when we breathe and actively recruit the diaphragm or do the expansion of the rib cage and really breathe low, we're literally sending vagal afferent, the sensory information, back to the brainstem that then gives more vagal efferent, motor control, back to the heart. So we're increasing that breathing in, heart rate speeding up, breathing out, heart rate slowing down. So we're giving ourselves much more of that sinusoidal curve of heart rate variability, which was what we really want. Okay, so that's another reason why Patrick's breathing low is so important. Okay, another part here is carbon dioxide buildup is an internal cue of threat. Okay, so which is what it is, right? We know that CO2 is what stimulates us to take our in-breath. And that's the brilliant part of what oxygen advantage is doing too. It's actually, and I'll get a little more into it, I'll just touch on it. It's actually teaching our physiology to not respond to increased levels of carbon dioxide as a cue of threat. It's a really important point, and we'll get a little more deep into that. And then fast, shallow mouth breathing signals threat to the body. Okay, so even if the breathing is caused because carbon dioxide is built up so much and you have to breathe quickly. You're also at the same time sending feedback to the brainstem that says, I am in a world of panic, reinforcing the cycle of highly mobilized, out of control, sympathetic activation. And so we want to learn how to regain control of that as quickly as possible, so we don't reinforce more threat physiology, okay? Which brings us to how I look at breathing on and off the court, okay? So we have breathing practices off the court. We have conscious breathing, that awareness of breathing that Patrick talks about all the time, where we're doing that deliberately as a neural exercise so that we're preparing ourselves to step onto the stage, to step onto the court with the highest level of cardiac vagal tone, the most sinusoidal respiratory sinus arrhythmia we can have, because that gives us a chance to have more of that vagal efficiency, that ability to rev up and slow down without flooding the system with too much sympathetic. So that's what the off the court stuff is. It's about, so we step onto the court with a much higher threshold for what we can handle, okay? And then on the court, our practices become strategies. We know how to shift and climb up and down that performance hierarchy through our breathing. There's many other resources, but I always work, breathing is fundamental. So we learn how to do different strategies depending on what zone we're in, because it's not always the same strategy. We might need to mobilize because we're in that lower row where we might be shutting down, okay? So here's my polyvagal perspective on Patrick's awesome stuff. So, and it's why I first looked at Patrick's work, because there's a lot of different breathing coaching and certifications, but nothing came close to what I thought aligned with polyvagal theory like Patrick's stuff. So the primary components of oxygen advantage, the biochemistry piece, what we're really doing is we're improving our tolerance to carbon dioxide, which will improve this capacity to maintain ventral vagal control as we elevate to higher and higher levels of metabolic output, which is vital, right? Because the truth is, an athlete, even a performer, they have to be able to elevate higher and higher. So the biochemistry piece is providing a foundation for that, okay? The biomechanics piece is what we kind of talked about, that diaphragmatic lower rib cage expansion. It's actually increasing those vagal efferents coming down because it's highly innervated and it's promoting higher vagal afferent signals. Okay, so we're getting higher levels of baseline cardiac vagal tone again. The cadence, that the breathing in at 4.5 to 6 breaths per minute, finding that cadence, we also know that that optimizes that up and down heart rate, increasing, slowing again, which is also a vital strategy. So say you're in your play zone, say you're actually in a really good spot, even at home, and you feel really good. Well, that might be a time to just drop into cadence breathing to optimize where you are, to stabilize. So really fundamental. And then the functional breathing, maintaining functional breathing during movement would again be a giant cue of safety to the nervous system, that you're still breathing the same way you practice. So you're not going to flood your system with sympathetics. You're going to feel in control. Okay. And then the breath holds, the simulating altitude training, this is what I touched on. You're actually improving your tolerance to higher levels of carbon dioxide, which will ultimately shift that carbon dioxide buildup from being an internal cue of threat to actually neutral. It's no longer going to disrupt our sense of safety from the inside out as potently, which is giant. It's enormous, which is partly with the breath holds and the carbon dioxide. So as we enhance our capacity to tolerate higher levels of carbon dioxide, we expand our capacity for reaching higher levels of metabolic output and sympathetic activation before we lose it, before we lose control, before we have a panic attack, before we get flooded, or before we start to go down and deplete and have to shut down. Okay. So it's vital. And this, so before doing this week with you guys, I met with Dr. Porges, and I asked him, I was talking to him about breathing specifically. And I asked him to kind of summarize from his perspective what we're really doing when we're really practicing the oxygen advantage techniques and really just living a life where we're focused on building up a tolerance to higher levels of carbon dioxide. And this is how he eloquently put it. We are educating our body not to take these cues as threat cues so that we become explorers in the feelings, and that transforms those feelings from triggers to simply experiences. Okay. So remember, we'll just go back. Our body, it's always scanning for what's safe and unsafe in the environment and in our relationships and in our body. So as we really shift our relationship to this buildup of carbon dioxide, that feeling of the diaphragm even beginning to want to move on its own, those are no longer cues of uncomfort or discomfort and panic. And we can actually experience that in the moment, because sometimes we are going to exert ourselves at that level that we are going to exceed our capacity for that carbon dioxide is going to build up, but now it's not a giant, massive trigger. It's not going to flood our system. Okay. And this is my last, I'm almost done. I'm sorry, it's a long deal. So this is the last key concept from a neural perspective. We're trying to help the body become familiar with different feelings that would often in our own past or with others, feelings in the body that would normally trigger a massive loss of control. That's really what we're trying to do. Okay. Transitory challenges like breath holds and all of these things, these are really good for the autonomic nervous system because they're short, they're contained, and we can do them in a way that doesn't overwhelm our system, right? So we're trying to do transitory challenges like breath holds, like sitting and creating a little bit of breath hunger deliberately because we can do it with enough control and safety that we're not sending so much of a cue of danger that we're overwhelming our nervous system. And that can build resilience. And that's essentially what we're doing. Okay, so we can visit the feelings in a tolerable intensity, and then we can describe what the body feels like. And through that description and narrative, we're now using our big brains, all that thinking part, to allow the bottom-up feelings not to be threat cues. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it all up and then we'll talk. All right. So key point, bodily state, our physiology, it's either interrupting or it's promoting our performance. Okay. And we can let that all play out on its own because it's going to. We can hope for the best and we can even pretend, or we can repress what we're feeling, or we can not even show up. Right? There's a lot of different strategies. Or we can learn to manage our physiology to our advantage. We can recognize where we are on that performance hierarchy, and we can learn to regain control of our responses to support our performance, especially when it counts. And we can do this on and off the court. And because breathing is a reflection of our current state and one of the most efficient and effective portals into shifting it, it's one of our key resources that we want to really develop and understand with intention and awareness and become very skillful with. An optimal performance, it occurs only when we truly feel safe in our body, not just on the court, but off the court. It's off the court too. It's huge. Truly feel safe in our body. Second point, feelings of threat. So optimal performance occurs only when feelings of threat no longer trigger loss of control. We feel the feeling, but we don't lose it. We understand what's happening, okay? And we know what to do with it. And then third, optimal performance occurs only, and ultimately, we're able to shift our bodily responses to the stage, to the competition, to the evaluation, We're shifting those cues that are still going to be there, but we're changing them from threat to safety. And then when we're facing an opponent or a challenge, and this is the ultimate goal, is we change our opponents from enemies to opportunities, to elevate to the highest levels we could ever achieve. We couldn't do it alone. So we start actually feeling as though the opponent or the challenge or the environment is this opportunity to elevate, because it creates enough mobilized energy contained in our container of safety that it is the zone. That's the pinnacle. That's what people call the flow state. All right. And I'm saying the play zone is broader than that, but the flow state is within the play zone. And that is that place where the stage, the opponent, the situation is an opportunity to elevate. And that's happening in the nervous system. So I hope you got some of that. It was a lot in an hour. So yeah, but I did, before I stop, Patrick, I really wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and more importantly, for your awesome work. To me, it's been really impactful, and it's been a core of what I do from polyvagal theory's perspective. And you're also just a generous guy, and you're an example of someone who feels safe in their body. So I really, really respect it. Now I need to unmute everybody, including you. Hang on.
That was excellent, Michael. Thanks very much. It was super.
All right. Do I have to do anything, or did you take back over?
I can probably take back over, yeah, if I can figure it out.
Stop share. There we go.
Okay. So we'll keep the record going just in terms
Great.
of any questions anybody may have. So just the floor is yours. So if you have any questions.
Yeah, anybody have any questions?
Your opportunity.
Yeah, I got one, Michael.
Hi.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much. I enjoyed that quite a bit. So it's a two-part question. The whole time you were explaining the play zone, I was thinking flow.
Yep.
And so I'd like to hear your difference and what the expanded version is, and when would one upregulate and when would one downregulate if this play zone or flow state's in between these mobilized fight and rest and safety.
Yes.
When's that time? I'm thinking about this a lot.
Great questions. Well, first the flow state. All right, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Am I going?
No, you're good.
Okay. The flow state, like I said there at the end, it is one small piece of the play zone. And I'm not suggesting you can always get into that pure flow state, because there's so many conditions from the nervous system's perspective that need to come in line. You can do everything you can do to control what you can control, but you also have to be facing an opponent, a challenge that provides enough mobilized energy, enough of that to get specifically into what others have referred to as the flow state. So that's just one component. You also would have to have the ideal, like, metabolic resource available, right? So the exact lead up of sleep patterns and food intake and the way you were breathing for the week leading up. Like, to me, the flow state is very, very specific. But what I'm saying here is that you can get close and you can learn to play with that. And then it's going to magically appear at times because those conditions will align. But I think there's too many conditions outside of what we can control to tap into that flow state. That's all that I'm saying. And then your second question, which is also a great question. Everyone has a different level that puts them in their flow state as far as their own level of mobilization. Like a Roger Federer, I'll stay in the line of tennis. Roger Federer's flow state has lower energy output, lower metabolic demands. Whereas Carlos Alcaraz, who's really climbing the ranks right now, he's a much higher mobilized That's where his play zone is too. So the play zone and the flow state, but the play zone has a range. And what you need to do is you need to know, and it's going to change too. It's not always going to be the same, because sometimes that higher level, you might have other factors that you're not aware of, but now you're missing. So you have to lower your energy output. You have to change your metabolic output to get more control, or you change what you're actually trying to execute so that you get more. Because every time, sorry, I'm jumping around, but whenever we are trying to execute something and it's missing, that's a cue of risk and danger to the nervous system, which is we want to get more safety. So you would change what you might actually be trying to do. You would change the level of metabolic output deliberately, slowing things down, depending on what's actually happening. So it's not always going to be, the shorter answer is it's not always going to be the same level of activation. It's going to change, but you're going to know kind of where your sweet spot is. And then you change. Breathing would be one thing. If you don't have enough energy, but you still feel relatively safe, then that happens, right? Like you could be completely safe and in control of whatever it is you're doing, but you notice your energy is dropping and you need more energy. So now you're going to deliberately add some muscle tension. You're going to add some speed of movement. You might increase your breathing. You might lengthen your inhale, because that raises our heart rate, that raises our blood pressure. So it's never going to be set. You're going to know where your sweet spot is, but you're going to know that you've got to be able to have enough awareness to know, am I losing enough little energy, even though I still feel safe? Or am I getting too amped up, even though I feel totally safe, but I'm getting too amped up? So it moves, it varies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's a great question.
And for Mary, you have to unmute, Mary.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for the presentation. This was great. I think my question is a lot along the lines of Christopher's, because I came in the habitual postures of muscles holding you in a state, or learning those and then changing those to bring you out of a state. Can you talk about that even more?
That's a great question. Yes. So I think that it's very much like breathing, right? So the habitual posture that you tend to carry would be a very good indicator of what physiology you've tend to stick in, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah. So yes, you could look at it from the same way I look at breathing. It's a reflection of your physiology, and it's a way to start shifting it with intention. Mm-hmm. And then I would just add in that as you shift it, and if you feel the body feel safer, mm-hmm. you stay with it, and you actually really pay attention to what that's like.
Okay. Right.
And you really allow your physiology and your nervous system to start trusting that that's actually where I can be. Right. With all of this, what's happened is we create these patterns. We create postural patterns included. We create breathing patterns. We create all of that because at some point, whether or not it's true at this moment, at some point, our nervous system, through that neuroception, it detected that we needed to be in a defensive threat response at some point, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what trauma is. Trauma is not an event. Trauma is the way our body responds to the event. Okay. Yeah. And that's the same thing. So, but what happens is the physiology gets locked in, right? And so like for someone who has a dorsal response and actually collapses and shuts down, it doesn't mean they might be locked into that dorsal. It means that they get locked into a threat response, or they could get locked into a threat response, and their nervous system has been adaptively retuned to see threat when there isn't threat. And they may respond by being highly mobilized now all the time, because their body also knows that even though that dorsal response, that shutting down response, is a last ditch effort to survive, it in of itself, it's dangerous. Because if you pass out, something else could happen, right? If you shut things down, you're not getting a lot of blood and oxygen to the brain. That's not good as a big mammal. So the body will adapt in different ways, but regardless, That's what trauma is. Trauma is when our physiology gets locked in a threat response. And that's what I would say posture could be too. And it might be being caused because there is a physiological cause. Maybe there is pain. And so maybe they're trying to avoid the pain but regardless, they're creating a pattern that is reflecting a threat response.
Thank you.
Does that
Very
make
much.
sense? That make
Oh, totally. Yeah, I
Okay.
was experiencing it in my body when we started. It was like all of a sudden I couldn't see. My eyes got really, and it's like, okay, so what's going on here? I'm not tired, but my eyes.
Yeah.
So I really just started lifting my cheeks from inside and that, and all of a sudden the
Great.
energy came back. And I
Awesome.
know it's a pattern from my past, and I know where it come from.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Awesome.
so
Good
thank
for
you.
Thanks for sharing that. It's great.
You're welcome.
I have a question, Michael, if it's okay.
Uh-huh.
For somebody to know when to upregulate and downregulate, so in order for them to use the breathing to do that, they have to have a fairly good awareness of their own breathing and also to know the techniques. Is it in your experience with working with people, can they easily get to that state that they know themselves where they are at and what zone they are at in order to get out of that zone? Or do you think people get confused, or is there a lot of poor awareness?
I think all of the above. I think initially with athletes, they aren't paying attention to it at all. I mean, the ones I've worked with many at all different levels, and there is a lack of awareness. So that's where I mostly start with off the court stuff, where there is a chance to have awareness, right? And build that. So for me, most of the practices I start with aren't engaging in their performance. It's off the court first, because I agree with you. They don't have that awareness. And part of it is you want to build that awareness so quickly and instinctively that it's not distracting your attention and your focus, right? So, and again, that's easier in practice. That's easier off the court and in practice. And then in tennis, which I do a lot of tennis, but in tennis, it's a little bit easier because you have forced breaks, right? So you have in between a point, you have about 22 seconds, 25 seconds. They set a shot clock and you have that amount of time. So what I do is I create a ritual. So really what they're doing is they're creating a ritual. So as soon as the point's over, you kick into the ritual. And what's the ritual? Well, the ritual might be, I start walking for my towel. And as I'm walking for my towel, I check in with my breathing. I check in with my posture. I start feeling my feet or feeling whatever provides reassurance to them. And so the first few seconds, it's part of a routine. So I teach a routine, and that's what they're coming into. And part of that routine is, how am I breathing? Oh, okay. Is my level, because I don't even want them actually, and you're bringing up a really good point, is when someone is really highly flooded or beginning to immobilize, and I mentioned that their thinking brain isn't working like it normally would, it's really hard to remember all that. But can you remember a routine? And part of that routine builds in that awareness. Yeah.
That's great.
That's a great question. And I really think people should write stuff down too. Like tennis, again, has an advantage. They get to sit down and they can have a little sheet there. They can look at stuff. They can even a little thing, oh, I'm in this, do this, right? So yeah, but I agree with you. Most athletes they're just doing what they've done, especially high performing athletes who started doing this when they were 3. They don't even know what they're doing.
So when you're saying to write stuff down, and so an athlete who has it written down, and if they then take a glance in it, it will remind them then, is it?
Yeah.
Point?
A cue,
Okay.
like a little cue card.
Yeah.
That's what my wife keeps wanting me to make, is these little cues. She's an artist and a librarian and really visual and all that too. And she really wants me to make these little play zone cue cards, which is actually smart. I probably will.
Sure.
Because it really is. And the truth is you can't think straight, and you don't know what you're doing, especially when you're panicking.
Yeah.
So, just
That's
like
true.
the other thing that I didn't talk about that I think is really great in what you're doing too is your pre-match kind of stuff, right? Where you're sitting with your breathing and you're kind of calming everything down. And then you do a series of the breath holds and all that. So you have, again, what you're doing is you're bringing yourself polyvagal wise, you're bringing yourself into that safe, controlled place, but then you're getting a little bit of activation so that you can present, right? So that you can perform, because you can't like, so this is a really key point. And I've watched a number of my athletes do this, like, and in tennis, you see it all the time. So you have these changeovers, or an athlete, your opponent will call an injury timeout. And now you're sitting there for 7 minutes. Well, that's letting your heart rate get too low. Like, that's where you might deliberately do some breathing that's elevating your heart rate, right? Like, there is that sweet spot, which goes back to that original question, is you have to know for yourself, where's your sweet spot? How much mobilization is in your wheelhouse? And how do you get there? And so I've watched many of my athletes, and I'll even like text them, like, look, don't sit there anymore. Go grab your jump rope and go jump rope off on the side. I mean, and these are professional players you're watching on television, and they're sitting there and they never think of that until you tell them. It's like, you can't sit there. You can't let everything get that calm. Your body then goes right into recovery mode. And when you're out there performing, you're not ever fully wanting to go in recovery mode. You want to recover between points and all, but you don't want to go back into full recovery mode. Not yet. So
Great. Thanks. And Satu?
Hi, thank you, Michael. Just
Hi.
fabulous stuff. Your clarity to the point is so fabulous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for that.
Thank you. So what I would like to bring out is that you have such a keen observation skills about the body language and the facial expression skills, whatever happens in the face. So that's an interest of mine also. I've been always reading the body language and also reading the face. And lately, the past few years when I've been teaching meditation and breathing, I've been also taking into account the relaxation of the face.
Yeah.
As the face has like 400 muscles, I just want to ask you, face has like 400 muscles, and there are layers and layers and layers and layers of tension in our faces.
Yes.
All these different expressions we take. So what we could do, and when I teach this, I ask them to let go a layer and another layer and another layer. So could you do it the other way around? Could you also give them a prep, like let go of your face, because face has so much to do with the vagus nerve, because the root of the tongue and all of the facial muscles are attached to the nerves 5 and 7 and 9, and all of that has could something to do with special exercises, could be a corporate chef or top, or could be a chef, or could be a athlete.
Yes.
Could they have that as an exercise? Just
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Love it. Yeah, I do a lot of, so that's great. Yeah, I think they could be doing that off the court as practices. And I do, that's one of my strategies and skills that I teach athletes, is deliberately changing the tension or the softness in a particular part of their face, particularly around the eyes, particularly around the mouth, the jaw, right? Using even their own vocalizations deliberately, like you're talking about because those are all the cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, the vagus is 10, and then 11. Those are all interconnected in the brainstem to the vagal regulation of your heart and your breathing and your whole visceral. So absolutely. It's right up there with breathing. And that was in my container of safety. I just don't have time to cover it all, but that's what I cover in my course that I have in my teaching, is all of that stuff. Because there's so many different things, from your posture, which was another great question, deliberately changing your posture, deliberately changing your gestures, right? And so, and that the difference here, I guess what another point I'd like to make here is that this isn't, I really don't like the term hacking. I don't like when there's so many people out there talking about hacking the nervous system or hacking your body. To me, that's missing the point. That's completely missing what we're talking about. What I'm trying to say here is that we when I use the word control, that's not hacking. I'm trying to first have you come into recognizing your body, recognizing your sensations, recognizing your emotions, recognizing all of that, respecting it, that it's a physiological response to threat, whatever it is. Recognize it. You don't even have to know what all it's reacting to. We don't, but respect it, recognize it, and then do what you can to regain control so that you act in alignment with your values, with your goals, right? That's it. And one of those, what you're just talking about, is so powerful because of that interconnection in the face. It's awesome. It's a great question.
Thank you so much. And I think that was a great thing we could add here. There are some other people joining in. Thank you so much. Thank you for your answer. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just conscious of your time now, Michael, as well. So how can people find out more? Again? What was the website that you said?
Thank you. Yeah. So it's theplayzone.net. Okay. Theplayzone.net, one word. And like I said, I have a course currently that covers what we covered today, plus more, quite a bit more. And that is an on-demand course. So similar to Patrick, your stuff, I have an on-demand course that you can watch and learn, and that will really introduce you to these key topics. And you can do that whenever you like. But I also have a coaching certificate course. And that first cohort, so again, similar to Patrick's, I meet with them live for 75 minutes once a week for 4 weeks. And then there will be a written exam, and then there will be case studies. And then we will continue to meet in groups. So very similar to the Oxygen Advantage system. And that first cohort will launch May 1st. So if you're interested in either of those, you can just go to my website, or you can drop me an email, michael@theplayzone.net. Particularly if you want to do the coach certificate course, because that's not live yet, because I'm not ready to accept the first group of cohorts. So if that's of interest, just email me, michael@theplayzone.net. But you know, it just, what it will help with is it'll help you understand how valuable breathing is, and particularly what Patrick's teaching and where it fits into our autonomic nervous system, and then how to sort of harness that. It'll just give you a little bit more understanding. And that may or may not be something you want to do, but if it is, that's what it will do. And then it'll also teach you those other strategies that we kind of touched on, using posture, using facial expressions, using relationships and all of that. It goes through all of those different things.
Great. Apologies for the background noise. I can't switch it off my end.
That's
because
okay.
it's on your side. But I think everybody got the details of your website, theplayzone.net, and your email address. So it was brilliant. Thanks very much.
Hey,
and
thank you.
just say thanks to all of the instructors as well for turning up. And
Thank you, guys. Really, it's great to meet you. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks again, bud.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Great.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll send you a copy.
Do please, if you can send me on, or you have to stop the record. If you can send it on to us tomorrow, and we'll send it out to everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.